The strongest men do not reveal what they fear until the one person they cannot afford to lose is lying silently between life and hope. Jonathan Hayes stepped out of the elevator just as the intensive care unit doors slid open, and for the first time in decades, every confident stride that had built his reputation across the city seemed to disappear beneath the cold white lights of St. Vincent Medical Center. Doctors, nurses, and security officers instinctively moved aside without being asked. They recognized his face long before they heard his name. Rumors had always traveled faster than truth, and everyone knew Jonathan Hayes as the powerful man whose influence reached places few people ever imagined. Tonight, however, power meant absolutely nothing. Beyond a thick glass window lay Amara Brooks, the quiet Black Maid who had spent the last 2 years making his mansion feel more like a home than a fortress. Machines surrounded her bed, their steady rhythm filling the room with the fragile sound of borrowed time. A physician approached slowly, holding a tablet that displayed pages of medical reports. "Mr. Hayes," she said with calm professionalism, "her condition is critical but stable for now. The next several hours will be extremely important." Jonathan barely acknowledged the words. His eyes never left the woman resting beneath the soft glow of hospital lights. Her peaceful expression looked almost unreal, as though she might wake at any moment and quietly apologize for causing everyone so much concern. That was exactly the kind of person she had always been. She worried about everyone except herself. He stepped closer until only the glass separated them. Countless negotiations had taught him how to hide every emotion behind an unreadable face. Yet nothing could prepare him for seeing the woman who had silently cared for his family, now fighting a battle she had never chosen. Behind him, hospital staff continued moving through the hallway with careful urgency, while visitors whispered uncertainly, sensing that something extraordinary was unfolding without understanding why. Jonathan finally turned toward his chief of security. His voice remained low, controlled, almost unsettling in its calmness. "Secure every entrance and every restricted floor. Coordinate with hospital administration immediately. Until we understand exactly what happened, nobody connected to this investigation leaves this building unnoticed." Within minutes, additional security officers quietly appeared throughout the hospital, working alongside administrators to monitor access points without interrupting patient care. Elevators serving restricted areas required authorization. Visitor records were reviewed. Surveillance footage began downloading onto secure monitors inside a temporary conference room. Confusion spread through the waiting areas, but inside the intensive care unit, only one thing mattered. Amara remained completely still. A nurse gently adjusted one of the monitoring devices before looking toward Jonathan. "She is stronger than she looks," she said softly. "We have seen patients surprise us before." Jonathan gave the slightest nod, but his thoughts had already traveled backward through countless ordinary moments he had never truly appreciated. The warm coffee waiting outside his office every morning. The fresh flowers quietly replacing faded arrangements before anyone noticed. The laughter of his young daughter returning to a house that had once felt painfully silent. None of those memories seemed important until now. Suddenly, every quiet act carried unbearable weight. Then one of the security analysts entered the hallway carrying a tablet filled with surveillance images. "Sir," he said carefully, "we found something unusual. A temporary contractor entered this hospital less than 30 minutes before Miss Brooks arrived. But according to hospital records, that person was never scheduled to be here." Jonathan slowly lifted his eyes from the intensive care room toward the screen, unaware that this single discovery would uncover a truth far greater than anyone inside the hospital was prepared to face. 2 years earlier, Amara Brooks arrived at the Hayes estate carrying a single weathered suitcase and a quiet confidence that did not depend on expensive clothes or impressive introductions. The mansion overlooked the rolling hills. Outside Boston, where towering oak trees framed stone pathways leading to a home admired by everyone who passed through its gates. To the outside world, it represented influence, wealth, and absolute control. To Amara, it was simply another place where honest work could create a better tomorrow. During her first morning, the head housekeeper explained the routines with careful precision. Breakfast was served at exactly 7 o'clock. Fresh flowers were replaced every Monday and Thursday. Family areas were always cleaned before sunrise. Personal questions were discouraged. Most importantly, the owner preferred efficiency over conversation. Amara smiled politely and thanked her for every instruction. She had learned years ago that respect was built through consistency rather than promises. Before the sun reached the highest branches outside the mansion, every hallway reflected warm morning light across spotless hardwood floors. The kitchen already smelled of freshly baked bread and rich coffee. The gardeners found watering cans waiting exactly where they needed them. A missing button was quietly sewn back onto a chauffeur's uniform before anyone noticed. Small acts of kindness followed Amara everywhere she worked, yet she never mentioned them. She simply believed that making another person's day easier was reason enough. Jonathan Hayes rarely noticed household staff. His calendar overflowed with business meetings, charitable events, and responsibilities that demanded constant attention. Yet something inside the estate slowly began changing in ways no renovation could explain. His young daughter, Lily, who had struggled with loneliness after losing her mother several years earlier, gradually started smiling again. Every afternoon, she wandered into the greenhouse where Amara patiently taught her how to grow herbs, vegetables, and bright summer flowers. They laughed together whenever tiny seedlings finally pushed through the soil, celebrating each new leaf as though it were something extraordinary. Jonathan observed these moments from his office window more than once, quietly wondering why his daughter seemed happier among garden beds than expensive toys. His elderly father also changed. Once withdrawn and silent, he began joining the family for dinner after Amara discovered his favorite homemade soup recipe tucked inside an old cookbook. Without asking for recognition, she prepared it every Sunday evening. The dining room slowly filled with conversations that had been missing for years. Employees noticed the difference as well. New staff members felt welcome because Amara greeted everyone by name. Tense mornings somehow became calmer whenever she appeared carrying nothing more than a warm smile and genuine patience. She never acted like someone trying to impress people. She simply cared. One rainy afternoon, Jonathan returned home earlier than expected after a meeting ended unexpectedly. Passing through the greenhouse, he stopped when he heard quiet laughter. Lily proudly held up a tiny tomato plant while Amara applauded as though the child had accomplished something remarkable. The simple joy on his daughter's face caught him completely by surprise. For a brief moment, Jonathan remained hidden behind the doorway, unwilling to interrupt a memory he somehow knew would matter one day. As he quietly walked away, he still believed Amara was simply an exceptional employee. He had no idea that while she was patiently healing the hearts inside his home, she had already begun noticing small details no one else seemed to see. Details that would soon place her directly in the path of a danger she never intended to face. As the months quietly passed, Jonathan Hayes began noticing changes that could not be explained by expensive renovations, business success, or careful planning. The mansion itself had not changed, yet somehow it felt different. The silence that had once filled every hallway had been replaced by gentle conversations. Meals lasted longer because family members no longer rushed away from the table. Employees smiled more often, greeting one another with genuine warmth instead of polite routine. None of those changes carried Amara Brooks's name, because she never sought recognition for anything she did. She believed the greatest kindness was the kind that allowed other people to shine. Lily became the happiest proof of that quiet transformation. Every Saturday morning she hurried outside before breakfast, eager to meet Amara in the greenhouse where rows of herbs, vegetables, and blooming flowers had become their shared little world. Amara patiently taught her that healthy gardens depended on attention to the smallest details. She explained that a single wilted leaf could warn of a larger problem, just as one thoughtful act could brighten an entire day. Jonathan occasionally watched them from the terrace while pretending to read financial reports. Seeing his daughter laugh without hesitation slowly softened a part of him he had believed would remain closed forever. His elderly father experienced a similar change. Once withdrawn into memories of the past, he now spent afternoons sitting beneath the old oak tree overlooking the gardens, often joined by Amara carrying homemade lemonade or a favorite book from the family library. She never rushed conversations. She simply listened. Somehow, the old man who rarely spoke to anyone gradually began sharing stories about Jonathan's childhood, stories even Jonathan had almost forgotten. Those moments quietly restored something money could never purchase. Yet while everyone else enjoyed the peace surrounding the estate, Amara's attentive eyes began noticing details that did not belong. Deliveries occasionally arrived 10 or 15 minutes earlier than scheduled. Boxes were sometimes placed in different storage rooms without explanation. One landscaping company suddenly changed vehicles despite using the same company name. None of those observations appeared alarming by themselves. Even so, Amara had spent her entire life learning that important truths often hid inside ordinary moments. Instead of alarming anyone, she purchased a small notebook during a grocery trip into town. Whenever she finished her evening duties, she quietly wrote short observations beside the date. No accusations. No conclusions. Only facts. Tuesday. Delivery truck arrived before the security log was updated. Thursday. Replacement flower vendor did not wear the usual company badge. Saturday. Maintenance inventory count did not match the storage room list. She believed careful observation was more valuable than fearful assumptions. One cool autumn evening, Jonathan unexpectedly found her sitting alone on a wooden bench near the greenhouse after sunset, writing beneath the soft glow of a garden lantern. He smiled politely and asked whether she enjoyed keeping a journal. Amara quickly closed the notebook with a gentle smile. "It only helps me remember little things," she answered. "Sometimes the smallest details become the most important ones later." Jonathan nodded without asking another question. At the time, her words sounded like simple wisdom from a thoughtful woman. He could not have imagined that those quiet pages already contained the first scattered pieces of a mystery slowly unfolding around his own family, or that Amara herself had unknowingly become the only person paying close enough attention to see the danger before anyone else ever could. The annual Hayes Foundation reception arrived on a crisp October evening, filling the estate with respected business leaders, community partners, and longtime family friends. Soft music drifted through the grand ballroom, while crystal chandeliers reflected warm golden light across polished marble floors. Every detail had been carefully prepared, from the elegant floral arrangements to the perfectly arranged dining tables. Jonathan Hayes welcomed each guest with his usual calm confidence, thanking donors for supporting programs that provided scholarships and housing assistance for struggling families. Across the room, Amara Brooks quietly ensured everything flowed without interruption, adjusting place settings, guiding new employees, and helping elderly guests find comfortable seats before anyone had to ask. To most people, she looked like another dedicated member of the household staff. Only those who worked beside her understood that she somehow noticed every small problem before it became visible to anyone else. As she carried a tray toward the ballroom entrance, something immediately caught her attention. A large white floral arrangement stood beside the main staircase where guests would soon gather for photographs with Jonathan. At first glance, nothing seemed unusual. The flowers matched the evening's decorations perfectly, yet Amara stopped walking. Earlier that morning, she had personally inspected every arrangement delivered to the estate, and this vase had not been among them. She slowly leaned closer while pretending to straighten a ribbon tied around the display. A faint, unfamiliar odor lingered beneath the scent of fresh lilies, subtle enough that most people would never notice it. Her expression remained calm, but every instinct quietly urged her to pay attention. Without creating alarm, she asked a nearby employee to bring another arrangement from the storage room, explaining that this one looked slightly out of balance. Within minutes, the original display had been removed before Jonathan or any of the guests reached the staircase. No one questioned her decision because everyone trusted her careful judgment. Even so, Amara could not shake the feeling that something about the replacement arrangement had been intentional rather than accidental. Throughout the evening, she discreetly watched unfamiliar faces instead of the celebration itself. A delivery driver lingered longer than necessary near the service entrance before quietly leaving. One temporary maintenance worker appeared in 2 different hallways despite having no visible equipment. Daniel Mercer, the estate operations coordinator, seemed unusually distracted whenever inventory records were mentioned, although he quickly dismissed every concern with polite explanations. None of those observations proved wrongdoing. Together, however, they formed a pattern that refused to leave Amara's mind. After the final guests departed and the ballroom grew quiet, Jonathan found her carefully reviewing delivery receipts in the service office. "You should have gone home an hour ago," he said with a faint smile. "You have done more than enough today." Amara looked up from the paperwork and returned the smile, though concern still rested quietly behind her eyes. "I just wanted to make sure everything matched the schedule," she answered. "Sometimes little mistakes become bigger ones if nobody notices them early." Jonathan thanked her for another successful event before leaving the office, believing she was simply being thorough. A few minutes later, Amara closed her notebook and added one final entry beneath that day's date. Replacement flowers. Unknown delivery. Verify supplier tomorrow. She slipped the notebook into her coat pocket, unaware that before another sunrise arrived, those ordinary words would become the first clues in a mystery that would change every life inside the Hayes estate forever. By the following afternoon, an uneasy feeling had settled quietly over the Hayes estate, although no one besides Amara Brooks seemed to notice it. The celebration had ended successfully, guests had returned home safely, and every room had been restored to its usual order. To everyone else, the previous evening had been another flawless event. Yet Amara could not stop thinking about the unfamiliar floral arrangement, the unexpected delivery, and the maintenance worker who had appeared where he did not belong. Instead of ignoring her instincts, she decided to verify the details before speaking to anyone. During her lunch break, she called the floral company whose name appeared on the delivery invoice. The manager sounded genuinely confused. "We did not deliver anything to the Hayes estate yesterday afternoon," he explained politely. "Our truck completed its final delivery before noon." Amara thanked him without revealing her concerns, then quietly compared the invoice with the original order stored in the estate office. The signatures looked authentic, but one invoice number did not match the company's normal sequence. She carefully wrote another note inside her small notebook without drawing attention to herself. Late that afternoon, she visited a neighborhood pharmacy after finishing several errands for the household. Without mentioning the estate or any specific incident, she asked the pharmacist a general question about unusual chemical odors that might be mistaken for fresh flowers. The pharmacist explained that certain industrial compounds could produce faint scents difficult for most people to recognize, especially when mixed with strong fragrances. Amara listened carefully, thanked her, and left with even more questions than answers. She still refused to accuse anyone because she believed suspicion without proof could unfairly damage innocent lives. As evening approached, Jonathan Hayes prepared to leave for an important meeting downtown. Before entering the waiting vehicle, he noticed Amara standing near the front entrance reviewing another delivery schedule. "You have looked distracted since yesterday," he observed. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Amara hesitated for only a moment before offering her familiar gentle smile. "I am probably worrying too much," she answered. "I would rather confirm the facts before creating unnecessary concern." Jonathan respected her honesty and nodded. "Then promise me one thing. If your concerns become more than questions, you will tell me immediately." "I promise," she replied sincerely. After his car disappeared through the estate gates, Amara returned inside and placed her notebook into the pocket of her coat before organizing several boxes of leftover food for a local community shelter, a weekly tradition she never missed. Less than an hour later, while volunteers prepared to distribute meals, she suddenly felt unusually weak and asked if she could sit down for a few minutes. The volunteers immediately called emergency medical services when they realized she needed professional care. News reached Jonathan while he was still in the middle of his meeting. He ended the conversation without explanation and left the building within seconds. During the drive to St. Vincent Medical Center, every quiet conversation he had shared with Amara over the past 2 years replayed in his mind. The notebook, the deliveries, the flowers, her promise to gather proof before speaking. By the time he reached the hospital, he no longer believed her condition was an unexplained medical emergency. Deep inside, he knew the answers she had been searching for had followed her all the way to the intensive care unit, and somewhere inside that hospital, someone already understood exactly why. Morning arrived without bringing comfort. Pale sunlight filtered through the windows of St. Vincent Medical Center, but inside the intensive care unit, time seemed to move according to the quiet rhythm of the heart monitor beside Amara Brooks. Jonathan Hayes had not left the hallway since the previous evening. A cup of untouched coffee rested on a nearby table, while security specialists carefully reviewed surveillance footage inside a temporary conference room provided by hospital administrators. Every camera angle, Visitor log, delivery record, and employee badge was examined with meticulous attention. Most of the recordings revealed nothing unusual. Families waited anxiously beside loved ones. Nurses comforted frightened patients. Physicians hurried from one consultation to another. Then one sequence changed everything. The temporary maintenance contractor seen entering the hospital shortly before Amara's arrival appeared on 3 different cameras carrying a toolbox that should have contained repair equipment. Yet according to hospital maintenance supervisors, no repairs had been scheduled anywhere near the intensive care unit that entire day. Jonathan requested a closer image. The identification badge looked authentic until the hospital administrator quietly pointed toward the company logo. That contractor had ended its service agreement with the hospital almost a year earlier. Someone had copied an outdated credential, hoping no one would notice. Jonathan thanked the administrator and calmly instructed his team to trace every hallway the unidentified man had used. Another discovery followed only minutes later. The man entered a restricted employee corridor leading toward the records department before disappearing during a 90-second interruption in the security camera system. The outage had initially been dismissed as a routine technical malfunction. Jonathan no longer believed that explanation. While investigators continued searching, one of the hospital pharmacists requested a private conversation. She appeared thoughtful rather than frightened. "Yesterday afternoon, Miss Brooks asked me an unusual question," she explained quietly. She wanted to know whether certain industrial compounds could leave a faint scent when mixed with fresh flowers. I asked why she was interested, but she smiled and said she hoped she was simply being overly cautious. Jonathan lowered his eyes for a moment. Amara had been trying to understand what she noticed instead of accusing anyone without evidence. The pharmacist carefully handed him a folded prescription envelope. "She accidentally left this behind before leaving. I thought it might matter." Inside rested a handwritten list in Amara's neat script. Replacement flowers. Delivery time changed. Confirm supplier. Verify maintenance access. No dramatic accusations appeared anywhere on the page. Only careful observations waiting for confirmation. Jonathan folded the paper with quiet respect. Even while carrying growing concern, she had chosen patience over fear and fairness over suspicion. His chief of security entered moments later carrying another report recovered from the Hayes estate. They had reviewed delivery schedules from the previous month and discovered that several routine vendor approvals had been authorized through a single estate administrator without the usual verification process. The approvals themselves appeared ordinary. Yet together they created opportunities that should never have existed. Jonathan looked once more through the glass toward Amara resting peacefully beneath the hospital lights. She had spent weeks protecting everyone around her without asking anyone to notice. Now the notebook she carried so quietly had become the map leading toward the truth. And for the first time, Jonathan realized that the greatest threat to his family had never come through force or fear, but through small details everyone ignored except the one woman who believed every ordinary moment deserved to be understood. Later that afternoon, Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore, the longtime head housekeeper of the Hayes estate, arrived quietly at St. Vincent Medical Center carrying a small wooden box she had discovered while preparing Amara Brooks's room for her return. She waited patiently until Jonathan Hayes stepped away from the intensive care window before placing the box into his hands. "I thought you should see this before anyone else does," she said softly. Jonathan opened the lid and found several neatly organized notebooks tied together with a faded blue ribbon. Between their pages rested pressed wildflowers collected from the estate gardens, children's drawings carefully folded to protect them from damage, handwritten soup recipes copied for his father, and dozens of simple reminders about birthdays, favorite meals, and small acts of kindness that had quietly brightened life inside the mansion. Beneath those personal memories lay a folder labeled Household Observations. Jonathan slowly opened the first page. Every entry followed the same pattern. A date, a time, a simple observation. No accusations, no assumptions. One page mentioned a delivery arriving earlier than scheduled. Another recorded an unfamiliar maintenance vehicle parked near the service entrance. A third noted that replacement flowers had appeared without matching the original inventory request. Amara had documented only facts because she believed the truth deserved patience before judgment. As Jonathan continued reading, a folded letter slipped gently onto the table. Across the front, she had written only one sentence. "Please read this only if my concerns become more important than my fears." He unfolded the paper with careful hands. Amara explained that she had hesitated to speak because she refused to risk damaging the reputation of innocent people through suspicion alone. She believed every person deserved fairness, especially those who had earned years of trust. She promised herself she would bring her concerns forward only after confirming every detail beyond doubt. Jonathan lowered the letter and remained silent for several moments. The room around him seemed to disappear beneath the weight of a single realization. Amara had never kept quiet because she lacked courage. She had remained silent because she possessed extraordinary integrity. She had been protecting not only his family, but also the dignity of everyone who might have been wrongly blamed. Mrs. Whitmore quietly wiped away a tear before speaking again. She always believed kindness should never come at the expense of justice, and justice should never come at the expense of kindness. Jonathan looked once more toward the intensive care room, where Amara continued resting beneath the gentle glow of the monitoring equipment. He suddenly remembered countless moments he had overlooked. The handwritten reminder left beside his morning coffee, encouraging him to get more rest. The vegetables she grew with Lily every weekend. The way she always made certain his father never ate dinner alone. None of those moments had ever asked for recognition. They had simply become part of the invisible foundation holding his family together. Just then, his chief of security entered carrying a newly enhanced surveillance image recovered from nearby traffic cameras. The photograph clearly showed the unidentified contractor meeting briefly with an estate administrator 2 days before the charity reception. No dramatic exchange took place. Only a quiet conversation beside a delivery vehicle before they walked away in different directions. Yet sitting on the pavement between them was the same distinctive white floral arrangement Amara had removed from the ballroom, without anyone realizing why. And at that moment, Jonathan understood that the woman everyone had mistaken for an ordinary housekeeper had quietly prevented a tragedy long before anyone else even realized danger had entered their lives. Just before sunrise, the quiet rhythm of the intensive care unit changed. A nurse studying the monitor noticed a small but unmistakable improvement and immediately called the attending physician. Jonathan Hayes rose from the chair beside the window where he had spent nearly every hour since arriving. The physician completed a careful examination before turning toward him with the first encouraging words anyone had spoken since that long night began. "She is responding better than we expected. She is not out of danger yet, but she is fighting her way back." Jonathan closed his eyes for only a moment, allowing himself the first steady breath he had taken in nearly 2 days. Hope returned carefully, almost cautiously, as though afraid to speak too loudly. A few minutes later, Amara Brooks slowly opened her eyes. The bright hospital lights blurred above her before gradually coming into focus. She recognized the familiar figure standing beside the bed and offered the faintest smile. "You should have gone home," she whispered. Jonathan shook his head gently. Home would not have meant anything without knowing you would return to it. Before she could answer, the physician encouraged her to rest, but Jonathan quietly asked one question that had remained with him since reading her notebook. "Why did you remove the flowers before the reception?" Amara remained silent for several seconds while fragmented memories slowly returned. "I noticed the arrangement was different from the others," she answered softly. "The delivery invoice did not match the supplier records, and the scent beneath the flowers did not belong there. I could not prove anything, so I decided the safest choice was simply to remove them before anyone gathered nearby." Jonathan listened without interrupting. "Why did you never tell me what you suspected?" Amara looked toward the hospital window where early morning sunlight had begun filling the room. "Because I was afraid I might accuse an innocent person without evidence," she replied quietly. "Trust takes years to build and only seconds to destroy. I wanted facts before I brought fear into your home." Her answer settled over the room with complete silence. Every member of the medical team standing nearby understood they were listening to someone whose first instinct had always been protecting others, even when remaining silent placed a greater burden on herself. At that same moment, Jonathan's chief of security entered carrying the final investigative report. Independent investigators had confirmed that a fraudulent supplier network had used forged business documents to gain temporary access to several private properties across the region. The estate administrator who approved the unusual deliveries had acted carelessly, but without criminal intent, believing the paperwork to be legitimate. The unfamiliar contractor had disappeared before authorities could question him, but the evidence left behind had fully explained the chain of events. Jonathan accepted the report without triumph. There was no satisfaction in being proven right. His attention returned immediately to Amara. "You saved my family long before anyone realized they needed saving," he said quietly. Amara gave a tired smile and slowly shook her head. "I only noticed little things." "Sometimes little things become very important," Jonathan answered. As morning light spread across the intensive care room, the steady sound of the monitor seemed stronger than before. Outside, hospital staff returned to their ordinary routines, unaware that inside one quiet room, a woman who had never asked for recognition had changed the course of an entire family's future simply by choosing integrity over fear, compassion over suspicion, and truth over the easier path of looking away. 3 weeks later, the first warm afternoon of early spring settled gently across the Hayes estate, transforming the gardens into a sea of fresh green leaves and colorful blossoms. The greenhouse doors stood open as a soft breeze carried the familiar scent of herbs, roses, and newly turned soil through the property. Life had quietly returned to its natural rhythm, but nothing inside the mansion felt quite the same. The people who lived and worked there smiled more easily now, not because they had forgotten everything that had happened, but because they had finally learned to appreciate the quiet person who had always stood beside them without asking for recognition. Amara Brooks walked slowly along the stone pathway, still recovering, but noticeably stronger each day. Every member of the household greeted her with genuine affection instead of formal courtesy. Lily hurried toward her carrying a basket of tomato seedlings, her excitement impossible to hide. "You promised we would plant these together before summer," she said with a bright smile. Amara laughed softly. "I remember every promise I make." Together they knelt beside the raised garden beds where tiny green shoots already reached toward the afternoon sun. Jonathan Hayes watched from the terrace for several quiet moments before walking down to join them. His father sat comfortably beneath the old oak tree reading one of the books Amara had once recommended, while Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore supervised the kitchen staff preparing a family dinner that filled the estate with comforting aromas. It no longer felt like a grand mansion occupied by strangers. It felt like a home. Later that evening, Jonathan invited every employee to gather in the main dining room. Many assumed it was simply another appreciation dinner, but the atmosphere felt different from the moment he stood before them without prepared notes or formal announcements. He looked around the room before speaking in a calm voice that carried quiet sincerity rather than authority. "For many years, I believed protecting this family meant providing security, success, and stability. I have recently learned that none of those things matter unless they are built upon kindness, honesty, and the courage to care for people who expect nothing in return." His eyes turned toward Amara. "You arrived here carrying one small suitcase and never asked for anything beyond the chance to work with dignity. Yet you gave every person in this house far more than any of us realized. You restored laughter where there had been silence. You brought patience where there had been loneliness. You protected this family while asking for no reward." Jonathan reached into a small wooden box resting on the table and removed a polished silver key attached to a simple leather keychain. "This key belongs to the lakeside cottage at the edge of the estate," he said gently as he placed it into Amara's hands. "It is no longer a guest house. From this day forward, it will always be your home whenever you choose to stay here. You are not part of this household because you work for us. You are part of this family because you have already lived as family for all of us." Complete silence filled the room before quiet tears appeared on more than one face. Amara looked down at the key, overwhelmed by gratitude yet unable to find immediate words. Finally, she smiled and whispered the only sentence that truly reflected who she had always been. "Thank you for seeing what was already here." Lily wrapped her arms around Amara without hesitation. Jonathan's father stood to applaud, and every employee joined him until the room echoed with heartfelt appreciation rather than obligation. As the sun slowly disappeared beyond the lake, Jonathan realized that influence could open doors, wealth could build magnificent homes, and power could command attention, but only humility could earn lasting respect. And on that peaceful spring evening, Everyone at the Hayes estate remembered that true dignity is never measured by status, but by the quiet kindness that changes lives without ever asking to be noticed.